Our last presenter today, you've all been waiting for him. We know him, we love him, is Seth Andrews. Seth Andrews is a former Christian broadcaster, a current author and podcaster, hosting The Thinking Atheist, one of the most popular online atheist communities in the entire world. The Thinking Atheist encourages all to reject faith and pursue reason and evidence. Seth has spoken to audiences in the UK, Canada, Europe, and Australia about his former faith, the promotion of science and skepticism, the importance of humanism in this often crazy world, and why we should all pursue a personal relationship with reality. Now, what is Seth talking about today? Well, I know that Jocelyn and David wanted to end the conference on like an uplifting and inspiring note, so here's the description, my best Seth voice.
The world is on fire. Cruelty and stupidity are the currencies of the powerful. Good people are in the crosshairs. Yet perhaps we can all take inspiration and motivation from a moment in history where humanity briefly prevailed.
Please welcome Seth Andrews.
It's funny, I've been doing this event since 2013 in some form for the Central Florida Free Thought community. And every time I see photos from a memory compared to the next one, there's more gray. And the headlines don't help, right? Today, I want to tell you a story, if I may. At the beginning of the 20th century, World War I was raging across Europe's western and eastern fronts. Allied forces facing off against the Central Powers, the enemy forces, in a meat grinder of conflict that would ultimately end the lives of 40 million soldiers and civilians. Militaries are nothing if not chains of command, and we understand why fighting forces need commanders, directing the fields of battle, admirals, generals, commanders, captains, people in positions of authority. But on one cold December night in 1914, miserable soldiers in opposing trenches stopped listening to authority, and instead they listened to each other and to themselves. This became an encounter that historians are still talking about more than 100 years later. Is there such a thing as a war story about love? The answer surprised me, and before I'm done today, I'll bet the answer will surprise you, and it might make you think and wonder and hope. I don't know about you, but I've felt starved of hope recently, right? I'm not sleeping very well. Has anybody else been restless at night? When I'm awake, I mostly have been hearing the white noise of a world gone mad. My reserves are low. My optimism is even lower. Instead of expecting great things, I am fearing the worst in a lot of situations. I'm reminded of that line from George Carlin. He said, you know, when you scratch a cynic, you find underneath a disappointed idealist. Any disappointed idealists in the room? I was talking to Natalie, my wife, about how it feels like democracy and decency have been circling the drain. Will the United States collapse upon itself? And I wonder if it will have died of two specific things: stupidity and cruelty. Now, if you will indulge my subjective definition for stupidity, dumb ideas driving bad behaviors. Has anybody known somebody who arrives at the fork of the road of life? One road represents consideration and thoughtfulness, wisdom, prudence, safety, opportunity, and the other road pretty much guarantees a shit show, and they almost always choose the shit show. Has anybody ever known somebody like that? And today we see a lot of those someones at the highest levels of power. Now, we've all been dumb about something or many things. But I am more and more aware of people who seem to be dumb about almost everything. They are 2 sheep short of a sweater. You know what I'm saying? There's a leak in the skylight. The fires are lit, the chimney is clogged. Right? They are a few crackers short of a charcuterie. Or do you know the kind of people I'm speaking about? We're not speaking about individuals. It's a culture, it's a movement, a demographic. Now, I struggle because stupidity and ignorance are different things that sometimes overlap. We are human beings. We're flawed primates. We've all done unintelligent, careless, unreasonable, stupid stuff. And to be human is to be ignorant and dumb about a great many things. And they're both frustrating, both of these things, ignorance and stupidity. They both make us face palm. They both give us red faces from time to time. But examples of stupid seems to be pretty much everywhere. Can I just vent for a second? A recent survey of Americans revealed 56% say we should not use Arabic numerals. More than half. In this world, vaccines cause autism. The earth might be flat. Airplane lights and stars in the sky are actually a coordinated drone army. The world's richest man and major Trump influencer has said C-section babies might have larger brains because vaginal births squish baby heads. The presidential inauguration speech included a reference to transgender mice. Georgia's 14th congressional district re-elected Marjorie Taylor Greene twice. The Jewish space laser woman, the woman who said gay people, the acceptance of non-heteros will cause heterosexuals to go extinct within 5 generations. The one who asserted that Bill Gates was growing fake meat in a peach tree dish. Who warned that Congress was being spied on by the gazpacho police. Georgia, District 14, looked at her and said, "More, please." By the way, I bought this for a shelf in my office. It's a product that's made by a company called Concord Aerospace, and they obviously have a sense of humor. It is an actual Jewish space laser. And if you so chose, you could actually take out your wall light switch and you could wire this in and use a Jewish space laser button to turn the lights on and off in your house. My wife would kill me if I did this. You guys have heard the story about AOC and Marjorie Taylor Greene at the baseball game, right? No? Well, just as an accident, they ended up with adjacent seats right next to each other at the ball game. And the game hadn't started yet, and the players were out warming up in the field. And all of a sudden, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez jumped up out of her seat, and she reached over and grabbed Marjorie Taylor Greene. She pulled her out of her seat, hoisted her up over her head, and chucked her out onto the baseball field. And the umpire got up and turned around and said, "No, no, no, no. I said throw out the first pitch." Sometimes all you can do is laugh, right? And I'm amazed at how confident stupid people are that they are not stupid. Bertrand Russell, the great British philosopher, summed up our frustration. The fundamental cause of the trouble is that in the modern world, the stupid are cocksure while the intelligent are full of doubt. Not just ignorance. Ignorance can be fixed. I'm talking about people so thick that they're so dense that light bends around them. You know what I'm saying? And I don't think that description is unfair. Some people will come after me and say I'm being cruel, but I don't think it's unfair. Dumb ideas which drive bad behaviors. And then I feel numb from the dumb. And I'm reminded of Carl Sagan's words from the demon-haunted world. I have a foreboding of an America in my children's or grandchildren's lifetime, when the United States is a service and information economy, when nearly all the manufacturing industries have slipped away to other countries, when awesome technological powers are in the hands of a very few, and no one representing the public interest can even grasp the issues, when the people have lost the ability to set their own agendas or knowledgeably question those in authority, when, clutching our crystals and nervously consulting our horoscopes, our critical faculties in decline, unable to distinguish between what feels good and what's true, we slide almost without looking back into superstition and darkness. He could have written that this morning. And then comes the cruelty. And you and I have seen firsthand the examples of cruelty. Immigrants aren't just human beings, often escaping suffering and danger, but instead are drawn as pushers and rapists. Gay people are sodomites, in the crosshairs of divine judgments and God's wrath. Trans people are bathroom predators hunting our children. Where the poor are too weak and pathetic to not be poor. Where murdered school kids are ignored while AR-15s are protected. Scientists are vilified, abusers get exonerated, neo-Nazis march with flags and torches, and of course, the poster child for American cruelty, a person who is everything we teach our children not to be: liar, cheat, bully, predator. A man whose heart is so filled with poison that he can't even say Merry Christmas without telling his declared enemies to rot in hell. 77 million of our fellow Americans turned toward this man and they said, "I want that." The American experiment, it may die of stupidity and cruelty, but lately I've been wondering if I should modify that statement. Maybe when some cultures fall away, they die of authority. Anybody here heard of the Milgram experiment? This was a series of social scenarios that were set up in the 1960s, conducted by a Yale University psychologist named Stanley Milgram. And this was on the heels of the trial of Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann. And so Milgram wanted to understand the whole "they were just following orders" thing, and how could the German people have gone along with all of the atrocities? What was their rationale? What was happening in the human brain? How far might everyday people go if instructed to harm another by authority? 40 people were picked, all men, ages 20 to 50. Now, these were volunteers, and they thought they were setting up other people to be studied. In truth, they were the ones who were being watched. Here's how the scenario went. The unsuspecting volunteer was in the middle. He was given a list of questions for the subject, which was on the other side of a partition. And the volunteer controlled this device, totally fake, but made to look real. It was a machine that would send an electrical shock for every wrong answer given. And with each miss, the voltage would go up, starting at 15 volts all the way to 450 volts. And here is an actor who is being rigged with scary-looking shock cables that were not electrified, but he was acting, right? Shackled to the chair. This actor gave wrong answers on purpose. Now again, take a look. We've got the volunteer in the middle, the actor receiving the shocks behind the wall, and then we had an experimenter on the left. He was the authority supervising. He was watching it all go down. Many volunteers in this scenario, under the eye of that authority against their own conscience, doled out pain to total strangers, even when it grieved them personally. Watch this guy, obviously upset about the orders he had been given, as the actor on the other side of the partition was yelling and jumping and saying he was having heart palpitations or it would go just dead quiet. How many volunteers in this experiment went all the way to 450 volts? Try 60%. More than half, because an authority in the room demanded it. You must continue. The experiment requires that you continue. With every protest, the rebuttal became stronger. Neuroscientist Patrick Haggard of University College London did his own less extreme experiments, and he found that people mentally distance themselves from their actions when obeying orders. They surrender much of their own agency. If somebody else calls the shots, humans depersonalize their own actions for a number of reasons. Maybe they're going through moral distress, they're rationalizing, maybe they enjoy it but don't want to admit it. The human brain is extremely complicated. Psychologist and journalist Brian Resnick sums it up like this: dehumanization is a mental loophole that lets us harm other people. How many authoritarians have set false narratives about the other and demanded their mistreatment? Now, let's be fair. There are necessary contexts for authority. A parent tells a child, don't bully your brother. The teacher says, don't disrupt the class, do your homework. Police officers arrest the drunk driver and the domestic abuser. Courts will sentence criminals. Managers oversee employees. We understand authority, even chains of command. We get it. But it's authority with accountability. Authority with a small a. And yet, time and again, we see those primed by nature and or nurture to surrender themselves to a higher authority, often a savior figure. Here in the United States, we've seen that this is a demographic willing to suspend all the rules, to remove all checks and balances, to just give away everything from their passwords to the United States Constitution. For many, the ultimate authority is God. God demands submission. He commands obedience. He's the king in heaven who establishes kings on earth. Of course, authority has long understood the power of saying, my rule is God's will, not mine. It's not my idea. It's God's idea. Betray me, you betray God. I find it interesting the Bible is so filled with commands, not suggestions. Do the scriptures say, you know what? Follow your own moral compass. Do what you think is right. No, it says, obey me fully. Even Trump's new official presidential portrait is designed to communicate authoritarian power. And of course, this pose came easily for him because he's had plenty of practice. He speaks it, and so it is. He does it, and so it's lawful. He commands it, millions obey. Some obey out of love and loyalty, others because they just go along, still others out of fear. And in their obedience, they give away a precious part of themselves. The authoritarian Benito Mussolini engaged in a power grab back in 1922. This guy was imposing and charismatic. He assembled some disgruntled politicians and anarchists and discontented power players to establish a new political entity, the Italian fighting bands. Now, the word fasci or fascio, it's actually drawn from the Roman word. Let me say that again. The word fasci is rooted in the old Roman word for fascio. Fascio was a symbol. It was a bundle of sticks supporting an axe. Guess who was the axe? Marketing himself as the savior, strongman, often posing from tall perches and literal high horses, Mussolini rose to power by promising that if Italians would just give him total and absolute control, he would remove undesirables and restore national greatness. It was Italian MAGA, really. He aligned himself with another authoritarian, a killer and a tyrant, an association which also sounds alarmingly familiar today. And yet Mussolini's authoritarian rule would end in disgrace, defeat, and his own execution. But I want to come back to the fascist symbol. In ancient Rome, the fortified axe representing the authority to rule, reward, and punish. This symbol has been used for centuries with various meanings and interpretations, domination or maybe liberation. In fact, you might be surprised to see this symbol in our own House of Representatives. Said to signify the power of democratic states to fortify when united together. Here's a close-up. I can't help but wonder if we become ancient Rome. The dull edges supporting the sharp one, or the dull edges supporting the deadly one. I'm struck by the irony of seeing sticks that love an axe or support an axe. That's total irony to me. And yet, if history has shown us anything, it's what can happen when we, the people, recognize our true power, the power to speak up and rise up. Dr. King understood freedom isn't voluntarily handed out by authoritarians, especially those invoking the name of God. God wants us segregated. America first, or white America first. Yet generations organized, stood up and said no. Not that long ago in this country, American men happily assumed authority over women. I'll do the thinking, I'll achieve for the family, I'll vote for the both of us. Yet the brave activist of the suffrage movement organized to equalize the man's world, resulting in the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution in August of 1920. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Invoking God's authority, famous religious bigot Jerry Falwell famously said in 1981 that gay people were dangerous reprobates seeking a modern Sodom and Gomorrah, with homosexuals blamed for everything from pedophilia to the AIDS virus. He would even blame America's acceptance of non-heterosexuals for the attacks of 9/11. But the resistance said no. Millions of people stood up and continue to stand up for LGBT equality, gender equality, racial equality, even when it put them in the crosshairs of authority. When I think of that kind of courage for just a few seconds, for a few precious heartbeats, I can feel something switch inside of me. And I feel just a little bit more hope. And then I finish that Carlin quote where he says, and there's still some little flame alive somewhere that says, wouldn't it be nice? I know it sounds naive, but covering the cynical shell of me, there's the covering the idealist, inside is the idealist, how do I say this? Covering the cynical part of me, within the cynical part of me, there is an idealist. There is someone who wants the better world. Someone who is hanging on to the idea, wouldn't it be nice? Imagine There's no countries. It isn't hard to do, nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us and the world will be as one. John Lennon. And we imagine living in a world where people refused to allow somebody else to tell them what to think, what to do, who to love, who to hate. A place where we only allow authority in league with accountability, and more importantly, a life where we remember that we have the right to think and act for ourselves. I'll bet there are a lot of dreamers in this room, and I'm not the only one. Which brings me back to where I started. The story out of our history books. A human moment in an inhumane time. That war story about love. Now, I'm not commenting here about whether or not World War I was necessary. The stand against tyranny often requires conflict. We all get that. The stand against tyranny, the stand against evil often requires a response by the good. But I want to show you what happened one night in 1914 when everyday soldiers briefly stepped outside of the shadows and beyond the tribal lines of authority to find a few moments of humanity. World War I began July of 1914. France, Russia, Britain, and the United States, eventually Italy, joining forces against Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire, a bloody conflict that would cost millions of lives over the course of 4 years. The Western Front was the line of trenches stretching from the English Channel in the north to the Swiss Alps in the south, 475 miles long, running through much of Belgium and northern France. Trench warfare brought its own special brand of suffering, and the Western Front, of course, has been the subject of countless books, TV documentaries, films, etc. Opposing armies digging in like ticks, shielded by sandbags and barbed wire, attacking, counterattacking, desperately trying to find ways to advance, the space between them known as no man's land. Soldiers occupied a cold hell of deep mud, wet cigarettes, sleeping against a side wall, standing up because you couldn't lie down, worrying about conditions like trench foot, which could cost you a limb. Combat beyond the trenches was a meat grinder. Oh, it's easy to see why so many of these standoffs resulted in stalemates. Exhausting physically, exhausting emotionally. Christmas Eve, 1914. The war was only 5 months old. It was another cold night behind mud walls and barbed wire along a 30-mile stretch of trench controlled by the British Expeditionary Force. Many had thought the war would be over by Christmas, but with hundreds of thousands already dead, stalemates everywhere, no victory in sight, on both the Allied and the Central Powers sides, morale was literally below ground. Bruce Bairnsfather was an Allied captain and a machine gunner. He would go on to become a cartoonist and an author. He was like his fellow soldiers in that trench. He was shivering in the muck on Christmas Eve, but he would go on to chronicle what happened next. Around 10 p.m. Christmas Eve, Allied soldiers heard a noise coming from the enemy trenches. At first, they couldn't quite make it out. But then they recognized the sound. The enemy soldiers were singing Christmas carols. Who knows which song? Deck the halls, Silent Night, Hark the herald angels sing, something like that. But in a magical moment, the British troops in their own trenches joined in. Opposing armies with hundreds of feet between them suddenly united in music. Captain Bairnsfather would go on to report that a German soldier suddenly shouted out in English, "Come over, come join us." A British soldier responded, "I'm not going over there. You come halfway and we'll come halfway." And what happened next would go down in history as a kind of Christmas miracle. The armies of both sides got out of their trenches, walked into no man's land, and shook hands in peace, not as enemies, but as men who had just been united in song. What an incredible encounter. No shouts in anger, no bullets or bombs, only warm smiles and goodwill. Bairnsfather himself wrote about that day, quote, "There was not an atom of hate on either side." Another British soldier, a guy named John Ferguson, would chronicle that moment with this, quote, "Here we were laughing and chatting to men whom only a few hours before we were trying to kill." The men did their best to talk to each other despite the language barrier. The soldiers exchanged cigarettes and bottles of liquor. They showed photos of their families back home. They asked about sports teams and other pieces of trivia about their lives. Speaking of sports, in some places, the two camps improvised soccer matches with more than 100 soldiers running no man's land, kicking a ball together. Each side allowed the other side to collect their dead in an atmosphere of reverence and respect, honoring those who had fallen by giving them a chance at some kind of proper burial or remembrance. In those precious moments, these men were not acting under authority, unless you count the authority that they gave themselves. The permission to be a human being first. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. And this phenomenon was happening in other places all along the western and parts of the eastern front. The divided suddenly united on that Christmas Eve in 1914 until commanders on both sides heard about this truce. They were furious. They demanded the men immediately separate and return to fighting, threatening that if this happened again, there would be consequences. German soldiers would be executed, British soldiers court-martialed. But even then, many soldiers wouldn't or couldn't bring themselves to fire on the enemy. They couldn't try to carry out violence against the people they had just met in no man's land. And they would eventually get replaced, but far more obeyed authority. They returned to their lines, and they again began waging war against those they had befriended only a few moments before. I can't even imagine. There are memorials to that day, including this one in Staffordshire, England, an effigy of the handshakes on the battlefield. Here's one in Belgium, two soldiers shaking hands over a soccer ball on Christmas Eve with peace on earth, goodwill toward men. And again, I think of the words of Bertrand Russell. As soon as we abandon our reason and are content to rely on authority, there is no end to our troubles. He also said this: if power is bad, as it seems to be, let us reject it from our hearts. In this lies man's true freedom, in determination to worship only the God created by our own love of the good. And this informs the mission today. Yet how do we who love the good make a dent against so much bad? And the so much part is by design. In today's United States, authoritarian agents want us stunned and exhausted. Former Trump strategist admitted Former Trump strategist Steve Bannon admitted this on camera when he did a Frontline interview back in 2019. He said, flood the zone, right? The media is dumb and lazy, can only focus on one thing at a time. All we have to do is flood the zone. Every day we hit them with 3 things, they'll bite on one and we'll get all of our stuff done. But we've got to start with muzzle velocity. Use muzzle velocity to disorient, confuse, and overwhelm. The more everybody gets lost or gives up, the better for us. I recently saw a Zoom discussion by community organizers and activist Scottsdale Women Rising, and they hosted a psychologist named Dr. Jennifer Serlin, and she affirmed that how you are feeling right now is by design. Our brains aren't wired to handle all of this. We got to step back. If we find ourselves doom scrolling, our hearts will ache until they become scar tissue. Our brains and bodies will both be exhausted. We will get stressed and depressed in ways that harm us. We've got to engage in the goodness and self-care. Some suggestions here from the National Institute of Mental Health. Easy to say and hard to do, right? Eat well, prioritize getting rest, do relaxing things, remain thankful for the things that are good, because we all can think of some things. Set goals. If you see negativity overwhelming you, identify it and deal with it, and stay connected to your fellow human beings. We can support national organizations battling for state-church separation and equality and safety, whether they're fighting frontline legal battles or providing a hub for connecting communities by zip code. We can help them help us. This was President's Day, February 17th. How many defenders of the good showed up and stood up against authority at our own Capitol? That was amazing. American citizens are pushing back so hard on even local politicians that they are leaving town halls early and being instructed by party leadership to stop meeting their own constituents. Let me know how that works out for you. Local communities are banding together and rising up, and we can join them or lead them. A citizen-led coalition of librarians and archivists and data collectors is right now feverishly archiving whatever the Trump administration is so desperate to delete from government websites. They are rescuing, storing, and safekeeping the history, the justice, and the reality that authority once erased. Watch American courts actually enforcing checks and balances. The Supreme Court ruling to delay Trump's block of foreign aid, legal pushbacks on Trump's attempt to kill birthright citizenship. The federal judge who ruled that DOJ must release internal records for review of their legality. Constitutional and human rights lawsuits are piling up. And many of us are still desperately working at the friends and family level to explain, educate, encourage. We want others to see what's really happening, who it's hurting, why it's wrong. It's so frustrating at times. But we should and we must humanize the pain that's being inflicted on the people and the causes that we care about. I follow Heather Cox Richardson. If you do not, you should do so immediately. Heather Cox Richardson is a historian. She publishes an article or video almost daily. I am a fan. And she has said, what is happening is historic. What is happening right now is historic, but it is not unprecedented. Elite enslavers of the 1850s had control of pretty much everything. Theirs was a culture of division, stupidity, and cruelty, but the nation course corrected, elected Abraham Lincoln, and began to restore government by and for the people. And Richardson says, we can do it again. We must do it again. You and I are engaged in a battle to defeat the stupidity and the cruelty, authority, but we've also seen what's possible when we ignore the iron fists to focus on human hearts. And just like that miracle moment in a war zone so long ago, we will make our voices heard across the divide, and we will defy the dear leaders, and we will stand tall against authority. I like that line. It's misattributed to Thomas Jefferson, but it says, when injustice becomes law, resistance becomes duty. My friends, go out into your world. Go out into your families. Go out into your community, into your school board, your local politics, at the local, regional, national level, and resist. And as you stand for the good in that resistance, imagine. 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 Thank you all so much.